Hello and good morning. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us for our first ever Can Talks, the first in a series of debates and discussions from COVID Action Network, a new solutions journalism site, where we will be inviting a panel of experts every week to debate around our chosen topic. And this week we're looking into travel. So please join me in welcoming Bryan Pirolli, our chair today. He is a travel writer and academic. He has been published in everywhere from the Evening Standard to CNN, and he's taught in both New York and London and Paris on the subject. He will be in discussion with Tom Caton, the CRO of AirDNA, the short-term rental data analytics site. We also have Paul Charles, the former BBC presenter and former comms director for Virgin and Eurostar, and he is currently the CEO of a travel consulting firm. We also have Rebecca, who is by night a travel blogger and by day she works in development finance. And we also have Kane, the director of Vivid Travel, who offer bespoke holidays across the globe. So over to you, Bryan. I hope everyone enjoys the discussion and hopefully see you next week for our next in the series.
So thank you for having us. Thank you for everyone for being here. We just have a couple things to go over today. I really want to focus on this topic of trust with our panelists because we have some really cool people from some really interesting backgrounds. But before we jump into it, brevity is fun. Brevity is great. For those of us who are journalists, we know the economy of words is important. So I just wanted to get from each of you real quickly just one word to describe the current state of travel in the world. What would you give me? Tom, what do you got?
Paused.
All right, Rebecca?
Changing.
Paul?
Confused.
Yeah, I agree with that one. And Kane?
Cluster fluff.
All right, well, I think we are all in agreement on these words then. It's a weird time for all of us, wherever you are. And one of the big things that keeps coming up over and over again is this idea of when are we going to open up? And I think instead of trying to forecast too quickly into the future and instead of trying to look into a crystal ball that's just not there, we should just have a discussion on what we do know and what we can see and what we can observe. So, there's this idea of flying, airplanes need to open again. Ryanair went ahead and said they'll never fly if the middle seat is empty because of social distancing and all that. I guess my question to all four of you from your perspectives is, is this just a question of a vaccine? I know Kane had commented on LinkedIn earlier that, by Christmas, everything will be fine again. But
That wasn't exactly what I said, but go on.
Well, you said that COVID will be history by
COVID-19 will be history by Christmas, yeah.
All right. So, is this just a question for you of the vaccine, or is there something else in the travel industry that's changing, or that needs to change at this point? Like, has the tourism industry come to a reckoning where it's like, okay, yes, there's this vaccine, but there's other challenges that we're facing that we weren't talking about that now we can?
Well, yeah, totally. I think COVID-19 is a big story at the moment, but I don't think it'll be a big story quite soon. Maybe it's Christmas, maybe it's a bit later, I don't know. But basically, it's not going to be around for very long. There's a lot of clever people doing a lot of really good work on it. I'm actually quite hopeful that Oxford Uni are going to beat the Americans to it so we can have some national pride that we cracked it. But the big issue is going to be trust, and the damage that's being done to trust is going to be what holds the whole industry back and causes a lot of companies to fail that otherwise would have got through. You said be brief.
Yeah, no. I'm looking to Tom, Rebecca, Paul. Anything to add?
Oh, I'm really with Kane on this. I think I said paused as my comment. I think for the things holding travel back, there's the fear of catching the disease yourself, the fear of spreading the disease to other people who so it's not just your own personal responsibility, but there's the social responsibility. There's the government regulations that are going to come in, and then there's the depressed economy that could affect travel in the future. But of those four things, I feel once treatments become more effective, necessarily a vaccine, then the first three will fall away a bit, that tourism is so important to so many countries, so many economies. Glenn Fogel, the CEO of Booking.com, in his last earnings call, felt really strongly about this point, that people will be traveling again real soon. That urge is still there, and the operators might be different. The hotel owners might go bust, but the hotels aren't going anywhere. In our little spot in short-term rentals, I think maybe at our annual conference, maybe 80% of the exhibitors won't be there next year, but those short-term rentals will still be there. There's that demand won't be going away. So I position myself as in 12 months, it will be back to travel more or less as we know it.
I think it was interesting.
I'm afraid.
I think it's interesting what Kane said about the story, that it won't be a big story by Christmas or whenever it is. And that might be true, but I think it's interesting to think that we might not be thinking of COVID, but the implications will still be there. You know, we don't actively think about the impact of 9/11 on travel, but that doesn't mean that it didn't completely change the industry. So I think that, like, I agree that people will go back to traveling, and I think that we might stop thinking about COVID as the impetus for lots of the changes that are going to take place in travel, but those changes are going to happen, and lots of times they were already probably percolating there somewhere, and COVID has brought things to the forefront, exactly made the change take place quicker or in a different way. So we might not in the future think about COVID as the thing that really changed an industry, but it probably will, and we'll just find a new normal and kind of forget that COVID was the reason that it happened or those changes occurred.
Yeah, I don't think COVID-19 will change the industry. I think it's the crap response, particularly in the UK, of the travel industry to COVID-19 that is going to have longer term impact for sure.
It's not going to kill off the DNA in all of us to travel. There's no doubt about it. We'll always want to travel in some form, be it closer to home or further away and exploring. But I'm afraid COVID-19 has already changed the industry. And you only have to look at the fact that 62% of the world's aircraft are grounded. And airlines are laying off so many thousand people, and quite a few airlines won't be able to survive. And when airlines don't survive, the industry itself finds it hard to move forward, fundamentally because so many people use an airline in some way at the moment, or used to get to their destinations. So if the airlines aren't flying, people aren't going to be able to get from A to B as easily as possible, even if they want to take a train, a fantastic alternative to an airline. So it is already changing the industry.
Won't they take off again, Paul? Won't the planes just take off again?
No, they won't. The way airlines work is that you can't simply flick a switch and get those planes back into the air. You have to make sure the planes are checked and maintained. You have to make sure that people are retrained, so the pilots are retrained, because they can't, if they haven't been flying for 2 or 3 months, they've got to be relicensed. Secondly, all the people who work at airports have to have their passes rechecked for where they've been, criminal activity checks, where they've been previous 3 months when they haven't been using their airport passes. So if you think about the time it takes to get thousands of people back into their positions, even if you wanted to fly tomorrow, it wouldn't be possible for 6 months to a year for all these checks to happen. But fundamentally, airlines have a very good sixth sense about where demand is. And there are very good reasons why Warren Buffett has sold his stock. And there are very good reasons why the bosses of Delta and United and American have all said that it's going to take 3 to 4 years to recover. It will, because the demand simply won't be there. Same after 9/11, a shock to the system stops demand. And that's what we're seeing at the moment.
Well, we're seeing demand. We're seeing customers book 2021.
Yes, and it's great that they're booking 2021, but it's still going to be slimmer. It's a smaller market. I'm not saying there's going to be no demand. I'm saying it's going to be 50% less demand. And the reason why it's 50% less is because, first of all, you're going to have very high unemployment, so people will not be able to afford to take as grand a holiday as they used to in some cases. And secondly, the top end of the market, or at least the 60-plus age group end of the market, will be more fearful of traveling until there is a vaccine. And even if there's no vaccine, they're going to find it very hard to get insurance, travel insurance, because the insurers will not include COVID-19 within their insurance. And if you don't get insurance and you're over the age of 60, 65, it's very hard to travel actually and get on a cruise, fly, etc.
But I hear what you say, Paul. But one of the things I find interesting about that age group, having spoken to some of them, is because they are conscious of their age, some of them have a different approach and think, well, I've only got maybe 10 years left when I can do this. So okay, there's risks. Okay, there's been some horrible images about cruises, but actually I like cruises and I'll probably be okay. I'm going to take my chances. And I think you're right.
Yeah,
I think the market will be reduced in 2021 for sure. I don't disagree, but there will still be, I think, a good market, particularly for companies that have looked after their customers in the crisis.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there will be demand. It just won't be the same.
Yeah, I think, I think the thing is that the airlines, them saying, us comparing it to what it was and saying that's a new normal is just not a good baseline. Like after, in the US, when they deregulated airlines, it used to be that each country had a national carrier and that was the main one. And there were highly regulated markets, especially in the US. They deregulated. Everyone thought it was going to kind of be the end of the world. And it wasn't the end of the world. The airlines changed. And after 9/11, that's not to say that demand doesn't completely change and for a sustained period of time, but we'll adapt to a new normal. And I think like Bryan said at the beginning, it's so hard to gaze into that crystal ball and think about what our new normal is. So it's not that there won't be a demand. Like I 100% agree with Kane that demand is already there. I mean, I've already started just like out of curiosity looking at flights. Like I haven't booked anything, but it's starting. You see people talking about traveling and you don't want to get left behind. FOMO's a thing. But I think the shape of the demand, I think it was interesting. You said the age groups, the demographics will be completely different. China
I think the market that will get hit hardest is business travel, not leisure travel. And I think what COVID-19 has done is it's like almost we once had a tech problem in my old business, and I switched it by actually I turned off the power to the whole building. My tech guy wasn't around, so I rebooted the whole building, and it worked. It solved the problem. And I think COVID-19 is like that. It's like rebooted the whole planet. And I think what will happen is the stuff that we like holidays, people will still go on their holidays by the bucket load. I've got no worries about leisure travel at all. Business travel, I mean, look how this is working out now. I mean, for me, actually, it's much more convenient, this kind of Zoom life for work, than commuting into London. So I think there will be the massive changes. I don't think there'll be the same amount of commuting. There won't be the same amount of business travel. I think Glenn's probably the smartest guy in travel. So if he says it's going to be all right, I kind of believe him. But I think Booking.com will see a drop in business travel for sure. That will change, I think.
I think we're all on the same page, more or less, that travel's not going away. But this idea of a new normal or just an altered reality is, it's there, whether it's in leisure travel, business travel, the event space. But with you're all saying, like, we'll get to this point. How do we, beyond sort of the physical checks of the airlines and the getting money in people's pockets so they can buy tickets, how do we rebuild trust so that people will feel comfortable taking those risks, though, whether it's getting on a flight to go internationally or crossing borders or going to a port to get onto a boat? Who is the onus on? Is it on the media? Is it on the marketers? Is it on the DMOs, the destinations themselves? Is it on the government? Where would you sort of, who's shouldering the bulk of that burden to get people to engage?
I think for the UK, certainly it's the travel companies. So I see it as my job to make customers have confidence in me and my business, that they'll get their trip or they'll get their money back. It's like any retail. You'll get your tin of beans, or if there's some problem with it, you'll get your money back. And travel should be exactly the same. So what we're doing is we're putting in place a trust fund, and I think it's to a higher standard than any trust fund has been done before. And the guy that's advising us on setting it up, Chris Foti, who's quite well known in the UK travel industry, he says it's like a gold standard. And basically, we'll put all the money into the trust fund, and then the suppliers will be paid out the trust fund, and then we will get our money last. So what happens at the moment with trust funds is people, they do kind of 80-90% of it, and that's why even some companies with trust funds haven't been able to refund all their customers in the UK. So what we're putting in place is a very simple, kind of black and white, gold standard trust fund. That'll be in place within a few months, and that'll mean that if there are issues like this in future, we'll be able to refund customers completely very quickly. I mean, we've done that this time, but I had to do that this time by putting more of my own money into the business. But next time the money would all be there sat in a trust fund, and I would hope that would become a standard for the UK.
That was my question. Is that something that every company can do? Are we expecting every travel company to have a pot of money for refunds? I mean, that seems like
they're going to have to. It's like you can't. That's what I mean. What's special about travel that you don't either get what you paid for or your money back? You've got to treat people fairly.
I think Kane's right here. Absolutely right. Sorry, Tom.
No, I was going to say Kane's got a tough job on his hands to convince consumers of that, and his gold standard will really help. But I think there's going to be that big trend towards drive to domestic travel for the next year or two. I think if I had the hunger for it, I'd open a B&B in the North German, North Sea coastal towns, because they'd be booming. And in England, Skegness and Blackpool will be like 1951 again this summer, because that urge to travel is still strong. On the 30th of April, Georgia, the state of Georgia in the US, opened up again, and we've never seen a bigger day for vacation rentals in the state of Georgia. So that urge is strong. But obviously right now, you'd be a bold person to pick a June flight to a faraway destination. So I think there'll be winners and losers, right? And, I wish Kane well in putting that forward so consumers have confidence. Yeah. And that there's drive to holidays you can feel a lot happier about.
I think that is
great what Kane's doing. It's very innovative and ideal in a way of building confidence. It's almost like creating a commercial version of Atoll, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
And having a pot of money, which is a good idea. Sadly, there are 20 to 30% of companies who are not so well run, who won't survive, who won't have the resource to be able to keep going. And so I think this is where we're going to see the adapting consumer emerge over the next few weeks and months, which is around them being very picky about who they choose to go with, being very picky about the airlines they choose to fly with, especially if they haven't had refunds from that particular airline. They'll decide to go with someone else. And also you're going to see the move towards domestic, undoubtedly, as Tom says, domestic over the next few weeks and months. Then European short haul in the UK will emerge maybe to this year, but more likely into next year. And then long haul won't come back until summer of next year. So you're going to see this delineation in category of where we're heading, simply because it's all about confidence. People will not be confident to go too far from where they live until they know that coronavirus has been beaten in some way. They don't want to take the risk of being stuck in a country where borders could close again at the last minute, or where healthcare systems are under deep pressure or have been under pressure. So they'll want to be close to home for that reason, because they can trust their own healthcare system.
I think that's right, but there's a difference between booking and travelling. And what we're seeing already is good demand for people to book now and travel in 2021. And another change that we've made is we've dropped our deposits for 2021 down to £20.21. So we're trying to solve the problem for the customer. So there's no risk. So we'll take the risk away from the customer, and that's how it should be. You can't ask customers to take a risk when they're buying a product. That doesn't work.
But I think there's the danger
of bookings are up because of. Sorry, do you think your bookings are up just quickly because of pent-up demand effect? It's 2 years being squeezed into one.
I don't think we're seeing that yet, but I think we will see that. I think our bookings are good because we've been good boys. We've been good boys. We've looked after our customers. We've made sure our customers know that. We've listened to them about what their problem is for 2021. We've solved that for them. We've got the message out there on that. And we're not doing anything special. What is so strange for me as a business person is we really now stand out in the UK. I get loads of coverage now. I'm in the mainstream press like 2 or 3 times a week. And what is our standout feature? We follow the law. It's ridiculous. It's insanity. There is a collective madness going on in the UK travel industry where loads of companies, even when they've got the money, they're not refunding their customers. I don't know why they're doing it. It's absolutely mad. But obviously, it makes Vivid Travel stand out.
I think there's a risk of saying like customers or consumers and assuming our risk tolerance is all the same. You know, like to say that my risk tolerance is the same as my mother's risk tolerance is a misnomer. And so I think that like Paul raised some good points about how people will, you know, how people will feel about COVID, but I think that really depends on what the demographic is, whether it be like age, income bracket, or just general risk tolerance. You know, people feel different ways. And I think that some people may feel that they need to wait a long time because of access to healthcare, because they're worried about contracting it more than others, because of the potential outcome. But I think that it's going to be more important than ever for companies and travel companies to know their market. You know, like, who are you in a market to first? If you right now are going after maybe the older consumer that you used to because they're wealthiest, well, then they might be the one who are focusing on domestic travel now. You need to go after a more risk tolerant, younger consumer who is more willing to stomach that risk. And I think it depends. And I think there are some people who, you know, I've had lots of flights canceled and I haven't got most of my money back. And that's unfortunate. And do I like it? No. Does it shake my confidence in the airline industry as a whole? No. I mean, I'm pragmatic. I believe, you know, knock on wood, that I'll get it back eventually. But that's my risk, like that's my feeling. So I think it's about the companies that survive are going to be the ones who really understand and segment the market and target different products to the appropriate like segment. And, you know, and ultimately I agree that this is the year for domestic travel as well. I mean, they're saying some countries their tourism industry will benefit. You know, if you have a well-off economy with globe-trotting, you know, with a globe-trotting population like Canada or Germany or the UK, who tend to spend their money abroad and now they're forced to spend it internally, like it could almost be, you know, the UK tourism industry could in some ways benefit this year. That's what some people are saying. Obviously there's a huge reduction overall, so I don't think benefit is the case, but I mean, there could be.
Well, there will be. I mean, that's just a fact, Rebecca, isn't it? I mean, you know, right here, right now, I'm not allowed to fly out of the UK. There isn't actually countries I think that I'm allowed to fly into. I don't know. So if I'm going to do anything if I'm going to have any kind of holiday at the moment, right now, it's going to have to be sort of UK based. I'm not actually even sure I can do that at the moment. I don't think I can. But for sure, in 2020 there will be some companies that begin to benefit from that sort of switch in demand. But I do think that will be short term. And, you know, I'm from the north of England and I wish Blackpool every success, and it certainly needs it. It's had a rough time in recent years. But I'm not sure there's going to be a kind of resurgence in domestic tourism that's going to last for a decade. I think they're going to see a benefit this year, maybe next year. And then I think people are going to go back to doing what they've kind of chosen to do for the last 30 or 40 years. And they're going to fly off to America because it's a bit more interesting than Blackpool.
But how do you think that the messaging for that is going to get across? I mean, Rebecca, you blog. I mean, I'm a journalist. Paul as well, you're a former journalist. Is there a messaging problem here that, you know, marketing efforts need to really push? I mean, look at Portugal, for example. They're coming out with this whole sort of accreditation program for hygiene to say, like, look, we're clean. We have hand sanitizer and all these standards. Is this something that is just sort of mediatized now to as like a Band-Aid fix in the messaging to rebuild trust? Or is there something else that the tourism industry needs to communicate on that they're not, or a different way that they need to communicate, like you're saying, Rebecca, to reach different audiences? I mean, there's there's a sort of almost like an ad agency-esque thing going on here where they're rebranding themselves. I mean, what's going on there, Rebecca?
It was funny that I was looking, I was thinking about travel and kind of reading what airlines were doing, what companies were doing. That showed up in my Instagram feed about the Portugal ad. I was like, wow, they're quick off the jump. And it kind of reminded me, like, because I work in development impact, of there's things that people are accusing companies of greenwashing, of pretending to be more environmental than they are. And I think there's almost going to be a safety washing where people are like, oh, you're pretending that you're safe. As an airline, you're pretending that what you're doing is going to make any difference. And there could be this kind of consumer backlash against this marketing campaign, safety marketing campaign of washing, like safety washing, and pretending that it makes a difference. So I think companies, especially when they're marketing, need to be very careful to be and seem, because they're different things that they're linked, but be and seem authentic. Airlines are saying the middle seat is going to be free. I know in China now that, like, May Day and there's an uptick in domestic travel, they're selling the middle seat. You can pay extra to have this seat. Even domestic Chinese flights empty. They're coming up with these things, and I think they need to be very wary and careful about angering consumers and making them feel like it's not authentic, and kind of that causing that backlash and further reducing the kind of trust that has been talked about.
I think tourism boards are going to have to reset, and they're looking at resetting, not in all cases, but in quite a few cases, simply because it's an opportunity for them to reassess where they were. And they're looking at, I think, quite a few of my clients, certainly, which are reflecting different parts of the world, are looking at the volume of tourists they were taking in, this whole problem of over-tourism, which has been remarkably wiped out overnight by coronavirus border closures. So here we are in a world of under-tourism, and it's a case of how do you deal with under-tourism into especially a small destination that's not used to having lots of tourists. So they're asking the question as to really what they're for now. What is a destination for? Who should they be targeting? Who should they be attracting? And I think there's going to be a split between the destinations who say we're focused on low volume but high value, so the wealthier travelers, of which there is a large market, and those destinations who are still focused on the mass market simply because they need to be due to the wealth of hotel rooms they've got and attractions they've got. I'm thinking especially of the Spanish coastline, for example, or Greece. And they're going to have to carry on focusing on the mass market. But they probably won't change a huge amount. I think the destinations that will change will be those that have been fledgling over the last 10 years, that have developed on the back of new air routes starting. And they're the ones that are going to suffer the most in the short term, because consumers won't dash back to those destinations quickly, partly because often their healthcare system is not as advanced as other destinations. And that will put people off in the short term, especially whilst there's still a risk of coronavirus going through a second wave or a third wave.
I think, Brian, like marketing and advertising is massively overrated. I mean, I would take TUI, for example. So TUI at the moment in the UK, they're spending millions trying to tell customers or trying to tell people who've maybe never booked with TUI what a great company they are. And at the same time, they're refusing to pay out millions to their existing customers who trusted them. I mean, it's just mad. It's just nonsense. So what I'd be saying to all stakeholders in this new kind of post-COVID-19 environment, as I see it, is, focus on making it real. I mean, don't try to spin that your hotel is safe, or your country is safe, or your airline is safe, or that you're going to pay people back. Don't give me the bullshit. Make it safe from a health perspective. Make it safe from a financial perspective. And these days, in terms of communication, I mean, just put it on Twitter. And people focus on the substance, not on the spin. That's what I would say.
You sound like you could be the American president. Just put it on Twitter. That's all we need.
Yeah, other jobs coming up, isn't it?
And then people won't believe you.
But Tom,
don't you have to be an American?
Tom, to build on all this idea of trust, you work with numbers and data and all that. Can data save us? can data build trust? Is there something in the numbers that we're not looking at that could help tourists going forward be like, oh, okay, I'm ready?
I think when we look through our data, the data is a response, right? So you can see how consumers are behaving. Perhaps, we're all speculating what people are doing, but when you get a mass view of the data, that's when you really get an insight into how people are thinking. It seems coronavirus predictions, it's like, it's almost like become the new dismal science instead of economics, that everyone has their opinions and all of us will be wrong. We just don't know in which ways we'll be wrong about predicting how humans as a mass are going to interpret it. On the other side, on a micro level for a business, when we started this company, there was a much more well-established firm called STR, Smith Travel Research, they used to be known as, who did hotel data and we did short-term rental data. And they always said, you should beg and pray for a recession every day, because it was the best thing that ever happened to this company, that they would grow thus, and then suddenly every time there was a recession, they'd surge, because for these small businesses, for people planning out when to have capacity, it would be a golden time. So when this recession has come, we theoretically were rubbing our hands together, but we didn't realise travel was the recession. So alas, our business has been hit like everyone else. But for all the business operators out there, when you're looking at TUI are looking to schedule how many flights they're going to have or how many people they're going to pay in advance, or all these other travel companies, this data looking in advance is far, far better than listening to talking heads like us speculating, because in there really does lie the answer as to whether they should put on capacity, how to make reservations in hotels, how to adapt their business to seeing the future. So I think in general, we hope when things normalise, travel data will be integral to other travel companies figuring out how to make their business planning.
But even sort of on the consumer side, think about the last 10 years, how people follow, TripAdvisor, right? They look at stars and numbers of reviews. They like data to help them make their choices. Do you think there's something to, seeing this uptick, for example, in travelers going to Georgia and renting houses in Georgia? Does seeing other consumers doing things and making choices, whether they're responsible or not, does that instill trust that, oh, okay, maybe things will get back to normal?
It's going to be huge, whether anyone will listen to us humble data companies, but that idea that your neighbours, your peer group are booking foreign destinations. Oh, it can't be that for some reason, because 4 people have booked a trip to Bali. That is probably far more powerful in you thinking it's safe than a bunch of data on COVID and hygiene and flight cancellation policies. So much as I wish we had a huge consumer market for our data services, I think it's going to be peer groups and you journalists out there who are going to really help people decide whether they want to invest in making a far-flung trip.
Yeah, I think human DNA is such that we follow the herd instinct. So, we heard a lot about herd immunity in the early days of coronavirus, which turned out to be a bit of a false dawn. But herd instinct is something that doesn't disappear. We generally like talking about what we've done. That's why Instagram's been so successful. And of course, we follow what others are doing. So that won't go away. And I think what's going to drive us all over the next few months, until far more is known about coronavirus, is the desire for and privacy on holiday. So I think there'll be a great demand for our own villas, our own cottages, our own holiday homes, space around us, destinations that offer lots of space in the countryside. Cities are going to suffer undoubtedly, partly because of what Kane was saying about the decline in business travel and shorter trips, but also because we'll be initially afraid of cities simply because those are the places that are the hotspots. So the places that will do well will be the places offering huge space around them, huge amounts of privacy, the ability for us to control what goes on around us. And that means countryside and probably coastline. And those are the areas that I think, and I hope Kane's probably seeing the benefit of bookings for, that we're going to see do rather well into 2021.
I think, Brian, when I live in Barcelona, and I often ask other foreigners who live in Barcelona, why did you come here? And if people were looking at data, they can measure, work-life balance, access to the sun, these kind of things. But actually, people who've moved here come here for either three reasons. One, they're a linguist, exposed to the Spanish language, some part of their exposure to Spanish made them move here. Two, they have a friend who moved out here, and they realise that's an option for someone in the UK. And three, they go on holiday here and they meet someone who lives here, and they so you're fluent in Spanish. Oh, well, I'm trying, but not really. But you can get a job here. So it's that kind of anecdotal thing that has driven almost the entire British community in Barcelona, rather than any analysis of the data. And I think holidays are just the same.
Well,
I think it's something called social contagion. When I was writing a post kind of reevaluating how I feel about travel, and I was like, why do we all end up in, Bali or Barcelona? And a friend was like, it's a psychological concept, and it's called social contagion, and we see what someone is doing, and we want to uncritically, we have the desire kind of subconsciously to uncritically copy them and follow it. I think the point about cities is 100% accurate, but I think, again, like, the interesting thing is to say, okay, so people won't be going to cities and will be going to the countryside, but then, like, so what? Like, what does that mean for travel as an industry? Now that it used to be that we did, like, when we saw lots of people going somewhere, we wanted to go to that place, but now it could almost be the opposite. If we see everyone flooding to a certain town on the English coast side, instead of saying, cool, all the Instagram influencers are there, I need to check it out, it's like, oh no, that's going to be the next hotspot. I need to find an even more remote spot. And that could go either way, that on one hand, it creates, like, further exacerbates this kind of trend of undiscovered, like, people rushing to try and, places that don't have tourist infrastructure and can't properly handle tourist rushing there. On the other hand, it could be that instead of everyone rushing to Barcelona and inundating a few key tourist spots and then completely changing fabric of cities, it could be that people are going to try and disperse more, and the benefits of tourism will touch more places. I don't know, it could go either way, and it could be a bit of both, but it's just interesting that these trends will have really far-reaching implications on the kind of economics and social aspects of travel overall.
I don't think it will. I think it's been massively overblown. I mean, where I live, it's quite close to the south coast. There's a very popular beach near where I live. There's no one really on it at the moment because they've closed it. Why have they closed it? Because people were coming in their thousands. They didn't give a monkeys. COVID-19, so what? I'm going to the beach. So they've had to close it. So this idea that there's millions of people terrified who are going to sit in their home once Boris lets us out again, forget it. People are not that frightened. I mean,
but they're not going to sit in their home.
Look at the numbers on the death rates. It's like 80-90% of the people that have died are over 60. So the vast majority of people are not that afraid of COVID-19. Don't blow it up into this. It's not that infectious. It's not that deadly. I mean, what we need to be careful of is there could be a really nasty virus that comes around at some point in the future. This is probably a bit of a dress rehearsal for a much more serious virus 10, 20 years time. But I think we're falling to the kind of media, oh my God, how could it all look? And real people, for what I see, they can't wait to get out of the houses again.
Yeah, but it's not about getting out the house. It's where you're going to go when you're out. So we're not saying that people aren't going to travel, but it's, will people who've now been sitting in their house and before kind of not mindlessly, but without a thought would book a trip to Barcelona. Now you have, when consumer make choices, as I'm sure you all, like, if you run business, that just like anything in the path to get someone to click on that flight, if you tweak one thing, it's someone can buy a different good. Yeah. So now they're in their house. One little change, instead of clicking yes on that Ryanair flight to Barcelona, they're stopping and thinking and saying, okay, instead of Barcelona, I'm going to go to rural Switzerland, or I'm going to go to Morocco because of XYZ. Those are random examples, but it's not that people won't travel, but it's that this will change people's perceptions of destinations, and it will, consumer trends are malleable at the best of times, and this is a 6-month gap where people have time to reevaluate their habits.
I
think none of us is a medic, obviously, on this call, but I think we should bear in mind this is infectious. There's no way.
No, I didn't say it wasn't infectious. I didn't say it wasn't infectious, but it's not. It's not the most infectious disease.
Very infectious.
Sorry,
it is infectious.
Of course,
it
it's
is
infectious.
Really infectious.
It's not the most infectious disease. It's the actual rates of infection. There's much more infectious diseases than COVID-19.
Right.
I didn't say it's not infectious.
But it's damaging. It is highly contagious. It's damaging, and you don't get countries down easily. They're shutting down for a reason, and they've got to nip this in the bud by closing everything and stopping us mixing.
I agree.
It will come back. I think if there's a second wave, that'll change everything.
Right. And
I agree with all that. Well, I'm not saying yes, it is infectious, and yes, it does kill some people. But I don't think we should. I don't think we should exaggerate it. We should just look at the hard facts on it in terms of how deadly it is and how infectious it is. And it's very harsh and very disproportionately harsh on older people. And that has an impact on what we're talking about, which is what consumers are going to do. And to Rebecca's point, is looking at what the substitute is. And the reason that business travel will never recover to the same level is because of Zoom. So there's a great substitute for business travel, is Zoom. The reason that the beach down the road for me will be packed the minute they open it up again is because there is not a great substitute for that beach for people living in London and the South Coast. So it's looking at what the consumer options are. It's the next best alternative, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the case. It's what are those alternatives? And I think it's okay, there's domestic travel. Okay, there's travel to cities. Okay, there's not traveling at all. There's so many options. And I think the difficult thing is figuring out which of the alternatives people are going to fall into. And I think often there's an alternative that we probably haven't even thought about, that there's a new travel trend. What does travel even mean? And it's this fallacy of trying to predict the future, but even figure out what those options are. And there's new options that are going to be coming up, new destinations that are going to win from this. These blocks, they're talking about these kind of groups of countries that are coming together with the European Eurozone has said that countries with similar risk profiles should kind of band together and create zones. I mean, it's going to be a whole different world now. I'm used to, as a British citizen or Canadian citizen, of being a desired traveler. People want, I can go almost anywhere I want. Well, now people don't want British citizens, not British citizens, but people from the UK necessarily. They want people from countries, it's like the power of your passport might be changed to your COVID rate. And so it's just going to change how that's going to be another change, maybe
short term though. That's all short term, isn't it? That only lasts as long as
short term influences people, habits form. How many months does it take to form a habit? And that doesn't mean that no one's going to do it, but what it means is new habits are forming. If you're a Chinese consumer who's always gone to Britain because you think it's Britain and France because they're safe, you get this tourist experience, and now for a year we don't know what the Chinese government is going to do. You're forced to travel to China, and within certain Asian blocks, that could form new trends where now, we've been talking about it from a very European perspective, but that's kind of old news. The future of travel is in Asia. So, how are those trends? Loads of British and French companies now rely on Chinese tourists, and never mind how we're influenced, how are they influenced now that they come to London and they think no one's wearing a mask? This is ridiculous. Doesn't matter, the facts of the health implications of wearing a mask aren't important. It's what consumers feel is safe is often the case. And, we'll have to wait and see what happens. And companies will have to adapt to those changes.
And I'm sure years ago, people were having the same discussion saying, oh, we're only going to take our shoes off at the airports for the next few weeks. And here we are, almost 20 years later, still doing it.
That's a different point, isn't it, Brian? I mean, that's because the risk of terrorism is still there. So you start to take your shoes off. But
exactly the point.
Will get fixed.
And that's exactly the point of this talk: is how do we resume trust without a vaccine? With a pandemic can happen any day. This is not something that's. I mean, the point is now that the systems are not in place to address, a pandemic in the global tourism industry, and now we're all suffering the consequences. So it's sort of how do we prepare for the next one? And to Rebecca's point, thinking about different ways of traveling. I mean, here in the States, for example, road trips are the big thing now. Everyone's saying road trips go local. a couple of years ago, you wouldn't be pushing road trips because they wouldn't be the most ecologically sensible things to do. So now we're seeing a shift, and sort of to direct the conversation elsewhere before we get the Q&A, to that point as well. I mean, when we think about the environmental impacts of tourism, which has been a big buzzword for the past few years, I mean, does rebuilding trust, is it going to come at the cost of sacrificing sort of the green-mindedness that we've been developing over the years? Or do you think in all of your sectors that we can still move forward with this idea of sustainable tourism while rebuilding trust? Is it almost an opportunity to rethink tourism in a way, like Rebecca said, spreading out, the visitors a bit more, and embracing under tourism as a way to give opportunities to new businesses and new economies?
Well, there will be.
There's no doubt. Sorry, go on, Kane.
Well, I was just going to say, Paul, I mean, almost to the point you made earlier on, I mean, we've gone from over-tourism to under-tourism, and there will be less of it going forwards. And places like Iceland that have, gone from being, really sort of interesting and, kind of off the beaten track, and we're absolutely packed. I mean, I was there a couple of years ago and it was swamped. That will actually improve. So there will be less tourism going forwards, and for the planet, that's good.
Yeah, I think there's the last 12 weeks and ongoing are framing the minds of every business leader in the travel sector at the moment. I think the good news is that the last few weeks will change more quickly the trends that we were starting to see, which are towards more responsibility, more sustainability. And that's a good thing. Businesses do realize they've got to change, whether it's particularly in terms of refunds, or whether it's sustainably in terms of jet fuel and the sort of planes they're flying and how modern they are. That's a good thing, that these things are now going to be up. And ironically, even the National Health Service, from a UK point of view, will move more in the next year than it will do in the next 10 years, probably because of technology. So it's undoubtedly a great opportunity, and any decent business that is well run will realize that they should use this as an opportunity to change how they do things, how they consume, how much they consume or pump out, and how their consumers can be willing to change very quickly. I think consumers, as a result of coronavirus, will adapt to new things. They will change how often they fly. They will change where they take their holidays. They will change how many clothes they buy on a regular basis. I think there will be some fundamental changes, just because it's given people a chance over the last 12 weeks to pause and then reset. And when we rethink what a crazy, rushed world we were living in. So it will change it.
I think it's I agree it's going to change, and I think it's a good opportunity for kind of governments and power structures to help codify that change. I think that, for example, they're talking about, okay, the airline industry is going to need a bailout, fine. And now there's talk that countries aren't coupling that bailout with any kind of environmental restrictions. I think it's one country, Austria, was the first to say, okay, we're about to give you billions of dollars or euros. What are you going to do to reduce the environmental impact and make a change? I'm a kind of finance and person during the day, and when the 2008 recession happened, the banks were bailed out, and then afterwards, as a kind of result of this bailout, the government came in and put in a whole load of financial restrictions. I know in my job, our company does a lot of travel to sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, and we're using this as an opportunity to think, already our culture around travel is going to change. How can we use this event that happened beyond our control to try and push the employees to stop traveling as much? You're already used to not traveling. You're already used to doing financial due diligence on companies from abroad, like from the UK. So how can we keep that momentum going, help people change their mindsets? But I think leaving it only up to the individual consumers is difficult, because I know, now is a good time for these governments, for the companies to start codifying that, and while consumers and people are living it, and that's the new norm.
I think Air France is getting their bailout from the country, but it's on the condition that they cut flights that are like an hour long that could be replaced by train travel or something like that. So it's a great initiative to
Exactly.
say, yeah, we'll help you, but.
And consumers, and that's the thing, like if you'd done it in regular time, consumers might be annoyed, but if you do it now, people are like, well, we weren't going to take that flight anyways. We weren't going to risk our health being stuck in some, cabin in the air. So it's fine. And then that becomes a new normal, and you don't have to fight that battle every step of the way.
Isn't that something else that's a bit overblown? Isn't it like from greenhouse gases you get 2% from flights and 40% is from people's central heating systems?
Yeah, but I think that's now. It is right now. Like tourism travel is low, but I mean, people are traveling more, and developing countries are traveling more. It's that way because right now Europe and the West and like North America is the bulk of travel, but China's rising, India's rising, and they're not going to stay at home. They're going to want to do the same things we do. And I forget the statistic, but it's like it's going to go from 2% to 30%. So to say, well, right now it's only 2 is kind of a misnomer. It's about, well, where's it going to be in 50 years when the demographics and trends?
Yeah, but airlines are changing. I mean, there's always going to be in every sector some that are better than others in all scenarios. Some airlines, like Finnair, are doing far more than other airlines in terms of modern fleet, biofuels, reducing the weight on board, bamboo cutlery instead of metal cutlery, all these sorts of things. So yes, the 2% is small and will be growing, but it will be growing much less as airlines work out for themselves that they've got to change fundamentally. But it is other sectors that need to look at the vast emissions they're doing. Airlines and cruise are small. It is the central heating, it is the power stations that fundamentally, if we're to reset, would be the ones you'd change first.
But I think Zoom might have taken 50% of all the kind of travel emissions away. I mean, I'm not going to be going back to London, thank God. I used to hate that crappy train from Chichester to London. I'm going to be working from here. I mean, it's like that. There's going to be, there's going to be much bigger, longer-term changes in terms of, I mean, all the office space. What's going to happen with that? I mean, there's going to be loads of empty offices. Loads of companies in the UK are going to bin their offices off. We're going to bin our office off. Why the hell pay for an office in London? Waste of money. So I think there's real great news there that will last for climate change and the environment, because I think people are going to do much, much less business travel, commuting travel.
Well, to that end as well, we are opening it up to questions right now, just so you know, and we did have a question that just came in. It's the question, obviously, that we're all thinking about. And again, I hate to throw a crystal ball out there, but we just got asked if we will be able to travel this year. Do we really think we should be planning at all for the rest of 2020, or should we just write it off and just put our heads down and wait till 2021?
In our data,
be able to travel, yeah.
Traveling between booking and traveling for short-term rentals has absolutely collapsed. I think you'll see that everywhere. That who would book an international holiday in August now? There's no reason to, but maybe in August you might book a holiday in August because you'll know the situation live at the time. So don't write it off entirely, but probably Kane won't like me saying this, but I probably wouldn't book something that's taking off in the next few months either.
Well, I mean, forget 2020 and book for 2021. Forget 2020, it's gone.
I think maybe the type of travel, so obviously domestic, but then I think people are kind of, the travel that I've seen happening is people visiting their families, or where people starting to plan to visit their families, where you can go socially isolate, like socially distance in a family home or something for 2 weeks and come back, and well, it doesn't really matter because you're going to be working, you can work from home because your company's now okay with it. So I think that's the travel that might start first, people going somewhere where they feel very comfortable, where they know it, usually a family home, a friend's home, then maybe places that they, like an Airbnb or a holiday home you've been to before, and then in 2021 or whenever it is, I don't have that crystal ball, it's starting up more the way it was before, I guess.
The next 3 weeks is going to define the next year, because if there is a second wave, it'll appear in the next 3 weeks, and that will lead to further lockdowns because governments will be nervous again. So if we get through the next 3 weeks on a European basis, certainly and in Asia without further major infections and deaths, then I think the coast will be clear for people to be more reassured. So I would say think about booking a holiday in June when we've got through the next 3 weeks. And I still believe you'll be able to go to various places at the back end of the summer, certainly in Q4, which could be quite strong for some places. So yeah, definitely wait and then book in a few weeks' time.
All right, and could I see a show of hands? Do we think that the middle seat will actually disappear or not?
How do I show my hand for that?
It won't disappear.
No,
There's no airlines need load factors of 80% to make money. You can't remove the middle seat and make any money, so they won't do it.
Yeah, I think the middle seat will carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I still think whether it's through the app, whether it's through the antibody testing, whether it's through the vaccine, whether it's through the antiviral medicine, I mean, for God's sakes, this is like a big problem. There's a lot of very clever people with billions of pounds of investment on the case. They're going to solve it. Stop panicking.
Yeah,
it's not solving, it's what is the new normal. It's not a yes or no answer, it's an evolution. So I think that's what it is. It's not like, yes, it's going to be solved, or no, it's not going to be solved. It's there's going to be changes. What are those changes? And so we might, again, it's the new normal, but it's not this new normal that looks nothing like it is before, but it's about, if you're a business, trying to realize what the adaptations are, and if you're a person, trying to be conscious of the adaptations you're making, sometimes without even realizing that you're making them.
Well, yeah, I think there's going to be massive changes, as I say. I mean, I don't think business travel will ever be the same again. So I'm definitely seeing there's going to be massive changes. But I admit it's a guessing game, but I am very optimistic, and there's a lot of clever people who share my view that COVID-19 is going to be kicked back to hell before the end of the year through some combination of medicine, basically.
We had another question for Rebecca. Somewhere on your blog, you said, don't do nothing because you can't do everything in relation to sustainable and responsible travel. I mean, is there something that travelers can do now while they're being inspired and sitting at home and planning for their future trips? Is there a way that they can change the way they think to be more sustainable or be more responsible going forward, whether it's booking or anything like that?
It's so difficult, but I think that for me, it was that using this beat where we're forced to take a break. And I know Paul said that not just to do with travel, we're all going to be reevaluating the kind of hectic lives we lived before, to use that and say, okay, now I'm not traveling. How much do I miss it? What do I miss about it? And then going back to this social contagion, was I just rushing to these destinations, rushing to this type of trip because everyone else was doing it? And taking the time to think, okay, like what are not to say don't travel, because I also say in my blog post, I'm fully aware that I'm going to start traveling again, but it's taking this time to evaluate the type of travel I'm going to do and say, if I can go, 6 months without getting on an airplane, 5 trips canceled, well, that means that maybe I don't need to go away every weekend, but I can go away and take one big 2-week trip, less flying, less emissions. You can go off the beaten track, really explore and understand a culture versus hopping and not getting that same exposure. So I think it allows us to take the time that we don't have in the kind of modern world to really stop and think. And then I guess if you're really bored to, dig and do some research, like research the good travel providers that care about these things. And if you really have that time on your hands, which most of us do now.
And I'm just going to challenge you maybe going forward, especially during a pandemic, to rethink the term social contagion. I think we could probably do better.
I'm open.
As well, just in terms of why people travel. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's part of a kind of annual campaign to try to stay sane. I think for people's mental health, like holidays are an important part of how people keep themselves going. So, I think it's a fun product. It's a luxury product, but I think it is also, actually very good for people to get away from work, get away from where they are, see something new, see something different, have a positive effect on families and relationships. And certainly, I've been selling holidays for a long time, and I always see them as a very, very precious product that people care about. You've got to get it right for them. It can certainly make or break people's years, and good holiday has a good impact on people.
I mean, but also...
Yeah, people want to have something to look forward to. That's why they go on holiday. And that's why they book a year in advance, sometimes 18 months in advance, just because they want to be able to think about where they're going and plan for it properly. And that won't disappear. I just think the new abnormal will be around having a slightly smaller industry, and it will rebuild. It's inevitable, simply because of the recession to end all recessions that we're in the middle of. So you will see job losses, sadly, on the scale we've seen from some airlines and some operators. We will be, I firmly believe, 30 to 40% smaller over the next year, just because of that sad loss of jobs. And then the industry, which is full of huge talent and passion, that's why we work in travel, will rebuild. So that's quite exciting. You know, it's terrible for those that lose their jobs, and you know, hopefully they will find work in other sectors in the meantime and then come back to travel. But travel will get better again, and it will re-innovate at that point. And then we're on for a fantastic next 3 or 4 years as we re-energize and rebuild. And then we'll be back to the level we were in 2019 within a few years' time. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's many glimmers of hope. There's 23 billion pounds of money that people aren't spending at the moment in the UK because they're stuck at home, and they're desperate to spend it on food and travel when they can. So that money will re-energize the sector.
Right. And Tom, does the data suggest at all that the bookings that have been going on have been different than what they might have been before the pandemic? Is there any indication that maybe more luxury travel, people are booking bigger villas or mansions or chateaus or anything like that? Is there any way to look into that?
There is, but I mean, is it permanent? So urban, tiny apartments down, rural, bountiful houses up, but I don't think we can say that's some trend of the future. That is the reality of our current situation, that people look for somewhere large and rural to isolate, particularly if you live in a tiny Manhattan apartment with your 2 kids, and there doesn't seem to be any social opprobrium with quarantine tourism elsewhere, then you do that. But I think we can't read into more than that it's just a feature at the moment.
Okay, so to end on a positive note, because you know it isn't all doom and gloom, I was wondering if each of you could just give me a quick one-liner about something positive that you've seen during this time, or something inspiring that you know has come out of this pandemic. See blank faces, like oh.
I think for climate change, isn't it? You know, I mean the stars at night, you can see them. You know, there's less air pollution, there's less noise pollution. That's going to have a massive. You know, that was the big topic certainly in the UK before COVID-19, and the reaction to COVID-19, which I think in this respect will be permanent, will be much less business travel and commuting, and that will be terrific for reducing the rate of climate change and air pollution.
Paul, what do you got?
I think working from home, the greater move to flexibility, mental health benefits of working from home, but it's not all about working from home. It's about the mix, and I think that's the great change that we're going to see. This ability to work from home, to meet up once or twice a week with your colleagues, if you can, if you're in that sort of business, and not just be stuck in this office environment. It's a fantastic freedom move that we've seen in the last few weeks, and long may it continue.
Rebecca?
Yeah, for anyone who knows me finally being able to cook something is a benefit for them. But for the wider, I think, people reevaluating what they actually need to be happy is good. And I think from a travel perspective, how engaged people are. You know, if you aren't active in the discussion and thinking and pushing governments and business to shape travel, it'll be shaped by someone else. So if you care about it and you have an opinion, then you have to be actively engaged in that. And it's interesting and great to see how many people are.
And finally, Tom.
Perhaps people will appreciate their local environment more. So as we slowly start to travel a little bit more, you'll start to really notice the features in your neighbourhood that's 10 minutes away from you in a way perhaps you never took the time to before. That might be nice.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you all very much. This was actually very insightful for me. I hope you all got something out of it as well. I think Rachel's going to pop back on.
Yeah, just to say thanks so much, guys. It was certainly an interesting debate. And that next week won't be applicable to you, but if you're interested, we will be doing the same for mental health. So keep an eye on our social media channels for more exciting hot debates.